Have you ever wondered if animals truly understand us? What if an elephant could save a life? Picture this: a tragic accident, a heroic elephant, and a bond so deep it transcends death itself. In today's incredible story, an elephant named Mohan makes an unforgettable gesture of bravery, saving a woman in a way that will leave you speechless. But why did he do it? What deep connection is revealed that no one saw coming? Stick with us till the end to uncover the shocking truth behind Mohan's act of heroism. If you're moved by this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with others who believe in the power of compassion. And make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories like this. It was a quiet morning on a small road in Savannah, Georgia. The sun was just rising, and everything was calm and peaceful. Sarah Miller, a nurse who always cared for others, was driving home after a long, tiring night at the hospital. She had spent the entire night helping patients and was looking forward to some rest. Her phone buzzed on the seat next to her. It was her brother, Ethan. Sarah picked it up and answered, her voice tired. "Hey, Ethan." "Sarah, are you on your way home?" Ethan asked. "You've been working too much." "Yeah, I'm almost there," Sarah said, keeping one hand on the steering wheel. "Just another long night." She didn't notice the sharp curve in the road ahead. The tires squealed as the car slid off the road. "Sarah, are you okay?" Ethan's voice called out from the phone. But Sarah couldn't answer. Her car hit a tree with a loud crash. The glass shattered, and the car flipped onto its side. Inside, Sarah was unconscious. Her phone lay nearby, still connected to Ethan, but she couldn't hear him anymore. A few cars stopped. People got out and looked at the wreck, but no one knew what to do. They stood there, unsure and afraid. Then, something incredible happened. Out of the trees nearby, an elephant appeared. The crowd went silent, staring in shock. The elephant slowly walked toward the crashed car, as if it knew exactly what to do. It was a quiet morning in Savannah, Georgia. Sarah Miller, a nurse, lay unconscious in her car. It had crashed into a tree and flipped over. Blood ran down her forehead, and she wasn't moving. People stopped to look, but stayed back. "She needs help," someone said softly. "Should we pull her out?" another person asked. But no one moved. Everyone was scared or unsure of what to do. Then, something unbelievable happened. Out of the nearby trees, an elephant appeared. The crowd gasped. It was Mohan, an elephant from a wildlife sanctuary nearby. He had escaped, but didn't seem scared. He walked slowly toward the car. "What's an elephant doing here?" someone whispered. Mohan stopped near the car and looked at it. He moved his trunk, feeling the car carefully. "He's trying to help," someone said. Mohan gently pushed the car door, but it didn't open. He tried again, pushing harder this time. The door creaked and opened slightly. The crowd held their breath. Mohan reached inside with his trunk. He carefully lifted Sarah out of the car. Everyone watched in silence. The big elephant carried Sarah gently, as if he knew she needed help. The sun peeked through the clouds, lighting up the scene. Nobody knew why the elephant had come, or why he had helped. They could only watch, amazed by what they had just seen. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. Mohan carefully wrapped his trunk around Sarah and pulled her out of the wrecked car. His huge trunk was gentle, almost like he was cradling her in his arms. With surprising care, he lifted Sarah up and started walking toward the hospital. His steps were calm, steady, and sure, as if he knew exactly what to do. People stood there shocked as Mohan walked by. Phones came out, and soon the whole scene was being recorded. "This is unbelievable," someone said. holding up their phone. "Look at this elephant." The video spread quickly. It was on social media in minutes. Hashtags like "Our Elephant Hero" and "Mohan Saves Life" popped up everywhere. The elephant who saved a woman became a viral sensation. But Mohan didn't pay attention to any of that. He just focused on walking, his eyes set on the hospital ahead. The crowd watched as he moved past, the noise and confusion around him not seeming to bother him at all. His only goal was to get Sarah the help she needed. As Mohan reached the hospital, the crowd had grown even larger, and police had started to manage the chaos. News reporters were now following him too, trying to get the story. But none of them knew why Mohan had chosen to help Sarah. What had made him do this brave thing? The answers were still unknown. Mohan walked slowly and carefully to St. Joseph's Medical Center. People watched in disbelief as the elephant brought Sarah to the hospital. When they arrived, doctors and nurses rushed out, shocked to see an elephant standing outside with Sarah in his trunk. "Oh my gosh, is this really happening?" a nurse said, her eyes wide. Mohan gently lowered Sarah to the ground. The doctors quickly stepped in and moved her onto a stretcher, rushing her inside the hospital. But no one could figure out how the elephant knew to bring her here. "Mohan just saved her," one of the doctors said. "But how did he know where to go?" Mohan didn't leave. He stayed just outside the hospital, standing still, as if he was waiting for something or someone. The police showed up soon after, trying to control the growing crowd. Reporters started taking pictures and asking questions. "Mohan, why did you save her?" one reporter shouted. "How did you know to bring her here?" But Mohan didn't respond. He remained calm, quietly standing there, waiting. Inside, the doctors worked hard to help Sarah. They were glad she was stable, but everyone felt something strange. It didn't seem like just an accident. It felt like there was something more to this. The staff couldn't stop talking about how Mohan had known exactly what to do. Outside, the crowd kept buzzing. People kept filming, asking more questions. But Mohan stayed outside, calm as ever. He didn't seem to care about the attention. His focus was on the hospital. Hours passed, and Sarah started to recover. The doctors said she would be okay. But still, Mohan didn't leave. He stood quietly by the hospital, his eyes fixed on the door. Why was he waiting? What was his connection to Sarah? As the day turned into evening, Mohan remained there, patient and calm, as if he knew something that no one else did. The big question still hung in the air. Why did Mohan save Sarah? The mystery deepened, and no one could explain it. The hours passed, and Sarah was stabilized, but she remained unconscious. Her pulse was steady, and the doctors had done everything they could to make sure she was out of immediate danger. But it was clear that the ordeal had taken a toll on her. As her recovery continued, the hospital was buzzing, not just with the usual flow of patients, but with a different kind of excitement. Reporters from all over Savannah and beyond had descended on St. Joseph's Medical Center, eager to cover the incredible story of the heroic elephant. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes sending live footage across the city. People were glued to their screens, sharing videos and posts about the elephant that had saved a woman's life. But while the media attention was overwhelming, the real question still lingered. Why had Mohan, an elephant, saved Sarah? Along with the reporters, animal behaviorists, and wildlife experts arrived. Their curiosity piqued. They had never seen an animal act in such a way. Elephants were known to be intelligent, social creatures, but saving a human in this way, it was unheard of. The experts huddled in the hospital's conference room, trying to piece together what had happened. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Sarah Williams, an animal behaviorist, said, looking at a monitor showing footage of Mohan walking toward the hospital. Elephants are smart, but this is beyond anything I've seen. Dr. Emily Thompson, a local animal psychologist, was among the first to approach Mohan in an attempt to communicate with him. She had dealt with elephants before, working with the nearby wildlife sanctuary where Mohan had escaped from. She knew elephants could understand commands and have deep emotional connections. But this was different. She could feel it in her bones. Mohan stood outside the hospital, his large frame blocking the entrance, his eyes never leaving the doors. His trunk swayed gently, and his ears flapped occasionally. But there was something else in the way he moved, an undeniable calmness. Dr. Thompson approached cautiously, her voice soft but steady. "Mohan, I need you to trust me. I'm here to help." The crowd watched in silence as the animal psychologist moved closer. But Mohan didn't react. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge her. Else, it was as if he was in his own world. "Mohan, I understand you saved her," Dr. Thompson continued, her voice filled with both awe and confusion. "But why? Why did you bring her here?" Still, Mohan stood still, his large brown eyes staring at the doors of the hospital. The connection between them seemed distant, as though something important was locked away inside him, something he wasn't ready to share. After several attempts, Dr. Thompson backed off. It was clear that no words were going to break through. Mohan wasn't ready to talk, or maybe he just didn't have the words. She couldn't be sure, but she was more convinced than ever that there was something else at play. As Mohan stood there, lost in thought, the hospital staff began to prepare a small room nearby for him to stay in. They couldn't leave him outside, especially not with the crowds growing larger. The crowd had gathered to see Mohan, some wanting to thank him, others still in awe of the elephant's surprising act of heroism. But as the hours ticked by, the mystery only deepened. Why had Mohan, a creature far from human, felt the need to save Sarah? What was the connection between them? And why had he been so determined to bring her to this hospital? Of all places? It was time to dig deeper into Mohan's past. As the media circus continued outside, the camera zoomed in on Mohan's face. There was an unmistakable sadness in his eyes, a depth that went beyond simple animal instinct. The scientists and animal experts could sense it too. They knew there had to be something more to this. And then, the flashbacks began to surface. The images in Mohan's mind stirred, as if he was remembering something long buried. The first flashback showed a younger Mohan, just a calf at the time, playing in a lush green field under the watchful eye of a man. The man was kind, gentle, and smiling. He was standing in front of a small wooden cabin in the middle of a forest. Mohan was learning the basics of human interaction, but more importantly, he had formed a deep bond with this man. The man fed him, played with him, and above all, treated him with kindness and respect. But then, the scene shifted. The air was thick with tension. There was shouting in the distance. The once peaceful cabin was surrounded by a group of armed men. They were loud, aggressive, and spoke in foreign languages Mohan didn't understand. The man tried to protect Mohan, shielding him from the chaos that had unfolded. But it was too late. The flashback showed a violent struggle, a man on the ground, shouting for help. Mohan, confused and scared, could do nothing. The last image before the memory faded was of the man lying motionless on the ground, a deep wound in his side. Mohan's memory returned to the present, the sadness in his eyes deepening. The flashback wasn't over, not completely. There were still pieces he wasn't ready to share, pieces that didn't make sense. But something about that moment, about the man, had stayed with him. And somehow that memory was connected to Sarah. The man he had lost, the pain of that day, had been part of the reason Mohan had acted the way he did. He wasn't just saving a human, he was saving a piece of himself. But what was the connection? Why had he chosen Sarah, of all people, to help? The answers were still locked deep inside Mohan, and no one, not even Dr. Thompson, had the key. The mystery of Mohan's heroism had only just begun to unravel. And as the days passed, the question remained, why Sarah? Why now? The sterile white walls of the hospital room were now painted with a sense of hope as Sarah slowly began to regain consciousness. She had been unconscious for hours, but now her eyelids fluttered and she began to stir. Soft whispers filled the room as family and doctors surrounded her, anxious but relieved that she had survived the accident. Sarah's mind was foggy, and her body felt like it had been struck by a heavy force. Her head throbbed with pain, and her limbs ached as if she had been through a battle. She squinted against the harsh hospital lights and took a moment to get her bearings. The images of the crash, the sound of metal twisting, the sharp scent of gasoline, and the blur of passing trees came rushing back. But it was the image of the elephant, Mohan, that stood out the most. She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry, her voice weak. With a great effort, she whispered, "Why did the elephant save me?" Her words barely reached the ears of those gathered around her, but they were heavy with an unspoken question, one that had been on everyone's mind since the moment Mohan had carried her to the hospital. Why had the elephant, a wild animal that could have easily turned away, gone so far out of its way to save a stranger? The answer that was about to unfold would shock everyone. As Sarah lay in her bed, trying to process the events of the past few hours, Dr. Emily Thompson, the animal psychologist, stood at the foot of her bed. She had been the one to try and communicate with Mohan earlier, and though she had made little headway, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection between the elephant and Sarah. There was something about this entire situation that felt personal. It was as if the elephant's actions weren't just about saving a human being. There was a deeper, more emotional connection at play, one that needed to be uncovered. "Sarah," Dr. Thompson began, her voice soft but full of purpose. "There's something important you need to know. Something I think you might remember, or at least feel." Sarah looked up, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before Dr. Thompson could answer, a familiar voice came from the doorway. It was Sarah's brother, Alex, who had been keeping vigil by her side since the accident. He stepped into the room, a phone in his hand, and a strange look on his face. "Sarah, you're awake," Alex said, relief in his voice. But as he looked at the doctors and Dr. Thompson, the expression on his face shifted to confusion. "What's going on? What's all this about?" Dr. Thompson nodded at Sarah. "It's time you knew the truth about Mohan. It's not just coincidence that he saved you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she locked eyes with Dr. Thompson. "What do you mean? What's the connection?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Dr. Thompson began to speak. "Years ago, before all of this happened, there was a man who meant a great deal to both you and Mohan. His name was Daniel." Dr. Thompson paused for a moment, allowing the name to settle into Sarah's mind. She recognized it instantly. Daniel, her late husband. Daniel was a wildlife veterinarian, Dr. Thompson continued, her voice steady. He worked with endangered animals all over the world, and years ago he was in India, where he found Mohan, just a baby elephant, after a terrible poaching incident. Sarah blinked, her head swimming with memories. She remembered the stories Daniel had told her. He had always been passionate about animals, especially elephants. He'd traveled far and wide, protecting them from poachers and offering medical care to those who had been injured or abused. But Sarah had never known the full extent of the bond Daniel had formed with Mohan. Mohan was orphaned after poachers killed his mother, Dr. Thompson explained. Daniel brought him back to the sanctuary where he worked, and for years he cared for Mohan. They formed an incredibly strong bond, one that went beyond simple caretaker and animal. The mention of Daniel's name made Sarah's heart ache. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the man she had loved so dearly. The man who had spent so many nights away from her, working with animals and saving lives. The man who had died far too young in a tragic accident. Dr. Thompson's voice broke through Sarah's thoughts. But the story doesn't end there. The room seemed to close in on Sarah as Dr. Thompson continued, revealing more of the past she hadn't fully known. Mohan and Daniel were inseparable, Dr. Thompson said. But one day everything changed. Daniel and a team of wildlife rangers had tracked a group of poachers who had been attacking elephants in the region. They tried to stop them, but it ended in tragedy. While Daniel and the others fought to protect Mohan, one of the poachers attacked Daniel. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she processed the words. She had never heard the full details of Daniel's death, only that it had been sudden, violent, and heartbreaking. Mohan witnessed it all, Dr. Thompson continued, her voice filled with sorrow. He watched as Daniel tried to protect him, and he couldn't save him. The poachers left, and Mohan was left with nothing but his grief and guilt. He couldn't understand why. He couldn't save Daniel, the man who had cared for him. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the memory of Daniel's death hit her all over again. But there was something else stirring in her heart now, something that felt both painful and profound. She understood now that Mohan had never gotten over that loss. He had lost his protector, his friend, the man who had given him a second chance at life. And now, Dr. Thompson said softly, Mohan must have sensed something in you, Sarah. He must have felt your pain, your vulnerability. Seeing you in danger, he remembered. He remembered the man who saved him, who took him in when he was lost, and saving you, bringing you here. It was his way of repaying that debt, honoring Daniel's legacy. Sarah's tears fell freely now, as she realized the full weight of the moment. The elephant that had saved her wasn't just acting out of instinct. He was acting out of love and loss, honoring the bond that had once existed between him and her late husband. Alex, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward. Are you telling me that Mohan saved her because of Daniel? Dr. Thompson nodded. Yes. In his own way, Mohan was saving Sarah to honor Daniel's memory. It wasn't just about protecting a stranger. It was about protecting a piece of the man he had loved so much. Sarah's heart felt as though it had been torn open, and yet at the same time, it felt full. The grief she had carried for so long, the loss of Daniel, it was now tangled with a deep sense of gratitude and awe for Mohan. The elephant had brought her back from the edge, not just because of her own suffering, but because of the love and loyalty he had carried for Daniel all these years. As she sat there, recovering from the emotional storm, Sarah knew that her life had changed forever. She had been saved not just by an elephant, but by a bond that transcended time, distance, and even death. The hospital room felt too small now, too filled with emotions that Sarah wasn't sure how to handle. Her heart was heavy, and yet there was a strange sense of peace that had settled in her chest. The words Dr. Thompson had shared echoed in her mind, each sentence unraveling a story she hadn't known. Stories of love, loss, and an animal's devotion so profound that it defied all logic. She had been saved, not just by any elephant, but by Mohan, the elephant her late husband, Daniel, had cared for so deeply. Sarah wiped away the tears that still lingered on her cheeks, taking in a deep breath. The sorrow she had lived with since Daniel's death seemed to mix with an unexpected gratitude. She wanted to express something to Mohan, to thank him properly, but she wasn't sure how. She needed to see him, to connect with him in a way that words couldn't fully capture. With a determined step, Sarah made her way out of the hospital, the cool Georgia air greeting her as she exited through the glass doors. The sound of birds chirping filled the air, but it felt distant, as if everything around her was muted, leaving only the urgency of the moment. There, standing just outside the hospital entrance, was Mohan. The sight of him stopped Sarah in her tracks. Mohan stood like a giant in the middle of the parking lot, his massive frame casting a long shadow against the morning sun. His tusks gleamed slightly, and his dark eyes seemed to carry a sadness that Sarah had never expected to see in an animal. But there was something else there too, a sense of understanding, a quiet wisdom that seemed far beyond the years he had lived. Sarah walked toward him slowly, her steps uncertain, but filled with purpose. She paused when she was only a few feet away from Mohan. His large gray form towered over her, but despite his imposing presence, she felt no fear. Instead, there was a profound sense of connection between them, something that she couldn't explain, but could deeply feel in her heart. As she stood before him, Sarah's emotions broke free again. She didn't try to hold back the tears this time. They fell freely, rolling down her cheeks as she gazed up at the elephant. Her chest ached with the weight of everything she had just learned, but there was also a sense of relief, as though Mohan's presence was somehow comforting. "Mohan," she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say, but thank you. Thank you for saving me." She paused for a moment, struggling to find the words to express what she was feeling. She had no idea how an animal, a creature who had never known her, could care so deeply. And yet Mohan had known. He had known in his heart that saving her was a way of honoring Daniel. Her husband's love for Mohan had transcended time and death, and now it had come full circle. Sarah reached out, gently placing her hand on Mohan's massive side, the rough skin of his body feeling strangely warm beneath her touch. "Your family, Mohan? Family," she said softly, her words quiet but full of emotion. "I won't ever forget what you did for me." As if he understood every word, Mohan slowly lowered his head. He looked down at Sarah with those deep, wise eyes, and then, with a slow but deliberate movement, he extended his trunk toward her. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as Mohan's trunk wrapped gently around her, as if embracing her in a silent hug. She stood there for several moments, letting the moment stretch out. She had been embraced by Mohan in a way that felt more like a human gesture than anything she could have imagined from an animal. It wasn't just the elephant's trunk resting on her. It was as if Mohan was offering her the closure she hadn't known she needed. It was his way of saying without words that everything was going to be okay. The onlookers who had gathered in the parking lot, watching from a distance, seemed to hold their breath. They too had seen something extraordinary unfold. Mohan wasn't just an elephant. He was a symbol of love and loyalty, of a bond that spanned beyond life and death. It was a moment so raw and pure that even those who didn't understand the depths of it felt its weight. Sarah stood there for a long time, her hand still resting on Mohan's side, her heart a whirlwind of emotions. She had lost Daniel years ago, but now, in this moment, she realized that a part of him had never truly gone. Daniel's love for Mohan had bridged the gap between life and death, and Mohan's act of saving her had given Sarah a chance to heal, to remember, and to move forward. She finally spoke, her voice soft, but filled with the clarity that only comes after a deep emotional release. "I'll never forget you, Mohan. You've brought me peace. Thank you, truly." As if hearing her words, Mohan gently lifted his trunk and touched her shoulder once more. The gesture was simple, but to Sarah, it felt like the world. It was as if he was telling her that he had completed what he needed to do, that his mission had been fulfilled. Mohan had saved her, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because it was a way for him to find peace, to honor Daniel's memory, and to bring Sarah the closure she so desperately needed. In the distance, a group of reporters and photographers snapped pictures, trying to capture the emotional moment. But for Sarah, none of that mattered. The world around her faded away. In that moment, all that mattered was the connection she had with Mohan, the elephant who had been Daniel's friend and who had become her family. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sarah stood with Mohan, silently acknowledging the bond they now shared. There were no more questions, no more confusion. The mystery of why Mohan had saved her was now clear. It was a story of love, loss, and redemption that had been written long before she had ever known it. And in that moment, Sarah realized that she had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at healing, at remembering, and at embracing the love that would always live on. It had been several weeks since that fateful day, the day Mohan, the gentle giant, had saved Sarah's life. The media frenzy had eventually died down, but the impact of his heroic act continued to resonate in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it, as well as those who had heard the story. For Sarah, the journey had only just begun. After spending some time in recovery, Sarah had taken it upon herself to spread the message of wildlife conservation and the deep emotional intelligence that animals like Mohan possessed. She had been profoundly moved by the bond that transcended species and time, the bond that had connected Mohan and Daniel, and later had brought Mohan to save her. Sarah felt a calling, a purpose, to honor both Daniel's memory and Mohan's love by working tirelessly to raise awareness for the protection of wildlife and the need for compassion toward all living beings. She partnered with animal rights organizations, spoke at schools, and shared her story in various media outlets, encouraging others to see animals not as mere creatures of instinct, but as beings capable of deep emotional understanding and loyalty. Every lecture she gave, every article she wrote, was a small step toward changing the narrative around animals, an effort to show the world that compassion, kindness, and loyalty were not confined to humans alone. As part of her advocacy, Sarah visited the sanctuary where Mohan had spent most of his life. The peaceful grounds, surrounded by lush greenery, seemed to hold a sense of tranquility, as though nature itself had found a place of healing after years of hardship. Mohan had returned to the sanctuary after his brave act, but he had become a living legend, a symbol of courage, loyalty, and the connection between humans and animals that couldn't be broken. When Sarah saw him again, standing tall among the other elephants, she approached slowly, a deep feeling of gratitude and peace in her heart. Mohan looked up, his wise eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, everything else in the world disappeared. She smiled softly, placing her hand on the fence that separated them, knowing that their bond was one of the most profound experiences of her life. "Mohan," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for everything. I'll carry your story with me always." In the stillness of the moment, it felt as though Mohan understood every word. He took a slow step forward, his trunk gently reaching out toward Sarah, as if offering a final gesture of thanks. perhaps even acknowledging her role in sharing his story with the world. He had saved her once, but now, in his quiet strength, he had helped Sarah find her true calling. As she stood there, Sarah realized that Mohan's heroism wasn't just about saving a life. It was about changing lives. It was about reminding humanity of the power of compassion, the ability to heal, and the unspoken bond that exists between all living creatures. His actions had not only redeemed him from the guilt he carried for so long, but had also inspired an entire community to see the world through a different lens. Months later, Sarah's efforts had begun to bear fruit. More and more people were starting to understand the emotional complexity of animals. The sanctuary where Mohan lived had seen an influx of visitors, all eager to learn about the elephants and the incredible bond that animals could share with humans. Sarah continued to visit Mohan regularly, and each time she felt a deep connection to the gentle giant, a bond that no one could ever truly explain, but one that was understood by those who had witnessed Mohan's act of courage. And then one morning, Sarah received a call. It was from Dr. Emily Thompson, the animal psychologist who had worked with Mohan. "Sarah," yes, Emily's voice was warm but somber. "Mohan is, well, he's not getting any younger. He's had a long life, but the years are starting to catch up with him. I think we both know that his time is coming." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she processed the news. It wasn't unexpected, but it still felt like a heavy weight in her chest. Mohan had given so much to the world, but as Sarah looked out at the horizon from her home, she knew that his legacy would live on forever, not just in the hearts of those who knew him, but in the message he had left behind. "Mohan will always be a part of me," Sarah whispered to herself. "His story, his bravery, will continue to inspire change." As time passed, Sarah's work continued to expand. She worked on projects to protect endangered species, educate the public about animal rights, and push for stronger laws to protect wildlife from poaching and habitat destruction. The world was slowly changing one step at a time, and Sarah knew that Mohan had been the spark for much of it. But the true message of Mohan's heroism was not simply about saving Sarah that day. It was about the way his actions had shown the world that love and loyalty aren't confined to humans. Mohan had been a symbol of courage, compassion, and the deep emotional ties that could exist between human and animal. His story continued to touch hearts, spreading across continents and inspiring a generation to take better care of the animals that shared the earth with us. The story of Mohan, the elephant who had saved a woman and forever changed the course of her life, became a symbol of something greater, a reminder that sometimes the most profound acts of humanity come from those we least expect.